Hey everyone, we're grateful for your support and hope our podcast has been helpful in both your personal and professional journey. We've added new continuing education webinars to our website. And as you renew your license, head over and check out our available courses. We'll be adding even more in the future, so stay tuned. And now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your academic and professional environment, no matter how long you've been there? Perhaps you grapple with the pressure of the model minority stereotype, feeling like your actions represent an entire culture. Or maybe you sense a glass or bamboo ceiling, unseen as a leader despite your hard work. These are just some of the realities faced by many AAPI psychologists and emerging professionals. Many strive to break free from these stereotypes, take risks, and connect with others who understand the complexities of intersectional identities. What are some of the professional spaces that can help foster the growth that we are seeking? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zhen. As part of our AAPI Heritage series, our guest today is Dr. Lauren Yang, a licensed psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry at Kaiser Permanente. She specializes in working with individuals with bipolar and other mood disorders, life transition challenges, marginalized identities, and the AAPI community. Dr. Yang is also the chair of Education and Training Council for the Asian American Psychological Association and was a past newsletter co-editor-in-chief. Having lived with bipolar 2 herself, Dr. Yang has served as vice chair of the Young Adult Council for the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. Her writings have been featured in essays and articles for the Alliance, the International Bipolar Foundation, and BP Hope magazine. Dr. Yang is also a sought-after speaker, having appeared on podcasts and panels to discuss mental health and bipolar disorder. As a Korean and Filipino Asian American psychologist, today Dr. Yang will be discussing the importance of seeking mentorship and community in AAPA. Dr. Yang, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
It is a pleasure to have you here. And why don't we start off with you telling us about some of the work you are doing at AAPA and some of the efforts AAPA is engaged with?
Yes, definitely. So as of now, being chair of the Education and Training Council in AAPA, we are definitely looking to advance more of our education and training initiatives, specifically promoting mental health, destigmatizing mental health conditions in our Asian American communities. So we're looking to definitely recruit more to our Education and Training Council. We're looking even for co-chair or vice chair to serve along with me to advance these initiatives. As part of our council activities, we create educational resources, we create online webinars, workshops, panel discussions with expert professionals, and community outreach as well. So just recently, actually, we were able to attend, or myself and our president of AAPA and another colleague was able to attend the GOMOT Filipino Mental Health Summit. That was an inaugural event for the Therapine chapter in the Bay Area. So that was just a recent event that we were able to go to help support Filipino mental health, for example, in that event.
Wow. It seems like there's a lot of advocacy and educational materials that are being produced. I also noticed too that when we're talking about AAPI, we're not a monolith. So then to be allies and group all the Asian community, even the Filipino community, I think that's stellar what AAPA is doing. Tell me about some of the work that you're directly involved with.
Yes. So in addition to my role in AAPA, I'm also the associate board president currently for Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. So in that role, I am also looking to build that group of early young career professionals who either have lived experience with mood disorders or who are looking to be an ally or advocate for those with mood disorders. So we have been looking to also do community outreach with our events. For example, I'll be putting out a webinar training in collaboration with Psychi Honor Society, an international honor society for college students, on how to take charge of their mental health in college and life beyond after graduation. So events like that we are looking to do as part of the board. We're also big on fundraising in order to continue DBSA's activities, programming, which is largely focused on the peer advocate and lived experience voice. So the support groups are a major part of their programming that we look to support and promote as well. So that's one activity. And then I'm also, as you mentioned, a licensed psychologist over at Kaiser Permanente. So that's my day job, my full-time work, that I'm providing individual and group therapy for adults in their outpatient clinic in a wide range of areas.
So, I mean, you're doing full-time clinical work, and on top of that, involved in the tremendous leadership efforts. What got you here?
Yeah. It's really been quite a full circle moment for me to reflect on that, having just been licensed last month and thinking back on my journey within DBSA as well, how I started out as in the young adult council 7 years ago or so now, or 6 years ago. But so from the very beginning, mental health was not a concept for me growing up. It was not part of the conversation. Of course, with myself or my parents, I had an early interest in psychology, saw that in my interest in my high school AP psychology course. But throughout college at UCLA, even though I majored in psychobiology, I really wasn't thinking about mental health as a career until I experienced my first hypomanic episode towards the end of my fourth year, right before graduation in 2013. So just a little bit of what that looked like. I was not getting much sleep. I was coming up with a bunch of ideas for a self-help blog that I thought was going to change the world. I was coming up with like 60 plus ideas in one night, checking out a bunch of books from the library that I could barely all carry out, that I thought was going to help with that project. So, and then started to become verbally aggressive though, even in that episode. That's that irritability, that aggression is not so much talked about in hypomanic episodes, but that was something that I unfortunately did experience and that I took out on, with those around me, like my boyfriend at the time, my college roommates, my dad, when I moved back home after graduating. But, that all obviously raised concerns among people around me. But when I started to notice the negative impact, of course, that I was having on people, I did bring myself to my college counseling center on campus. And that was my introduction to therapy and to medications there, which didn't, came with its own challenges. I didn't have such a good reaction to the first medication that I tried. Ended up going to the ER for adverse side effects, had a lot of body aches and a rash all over me, even for that. And so that was my first time also experiencing how a psychiatrist can be experienced, or how maybe poor bedside manner or quality of care can look like from a psychiatrist. Because she didn't doubt necessarily my symptoms of bipolar disorder that I was experiencing, but she doubted my experience of the side effects of the medication. She asked me, are you sure that wasn't the flu? Maybe that was just a fluke. So things like that, where, people did doubt kind of my experience, or even shamed or invalidated my earlier experiences, at the time. So in any case, did have really good experiences though with my therapist throughout my early years of seeking mental health help. Had a wonderful psychologist at the University Counseling Center that I first saw, the therapist thereafter. So I really, after all of that though, as graduation came and went, I didn't know what direction I wanted to go in. Actually, after that, I was pre-med, I was pre-health throughout college. But I was having this sort of crisis of faith of, did I really actually want to pursue that route for myself? And then I fell into a depression, seeing, my friends, my peers going off to their respective professional and medical schools. So it ended up taking me 4 years before I entered graduate school, my doctorate program in 2017. So I really had to take the time to think about, what my path was going to look like. And I would say the first 2 years were my denial years, still of thinking I was going to still pursue medical school. So I interned at a hospital. I was working part-time as a swim coach, but then noticed after I took the MCAT and was trying to bring myself to go through the application process for med school that my heart wasn't really in it still. Like I really took pause in that. And so the second 2 years, I got experience at outpatient treatment centers working as an assistant for the following 2 years before entering grad school. And that really affirmed it for me. So to not only think about how it was that I got mental health support or how I felt my therapist really helped me to not only get ahead of or get a wrangle on bipolar disorder, especially during a period of young adulthood where I was trying to figure out my life and my path. They helped me ultimately reclaim my life back. And so to be able to see and bear witness to how others were supported in those treatment centers, it really affirmed mental health care as a career
Wow.
path for me.
Wow, that's quite phenomenal because as you were sharing that early experience, I'm imagining a lot of fear because your world is just feeling unraveled. You're not sure what's going on. These relationships are being impacted. And you're also navigating a healthcare system that in many ways I'm speaking more so from the AAPI lens. We're a little bit more familiar from a medical model. Okay, this is
Right.
medical. You can deal with this. You can solve this. But wait, mental health. What's going on? How do you even deal or cope? Or what is this mental health thing? And it seems as though thinking about the medical model is, oh, you have this cure for mental health issues, as opposed to, no, this is who I am, and this is something I live with, and I need to integrate it. And this is part of my experience. And so I'd imagine it must have just been very frightening early on. And then for you to have the willingness to continue and face those ongoing uncertainties and challenges and reach out for that support and to get to where you are today is just what a phenomenal experience and story. And of course, to be able to share with others and like what you're doing right now, advocating for people who have gone through the system.
Right. Yeah. If anything, what keeps driving me and what I keep trying to remind myself of, whether in my clinical work, my advocacy efforts, the work that I do within AAPA as well for education and training, it cannot be overstated. I think how important it is to have others feel not only heard and listened to, but just really feel fully supported and actually seen in full for who it is that they are or what it is that they're struggling with. Because I remember how it felt to not feel that in many ways, right? Not just like with my bipolar disorder, but as someone who is Asian American and pursuing a doctorate in psychology, someone who's female in the field and just in multiple different ways have not felt seen and heard and supported actually. So that really drives a lot of what I do.
So, with that and trying to help people be seen and heard, you've talked about some of the trajectory in your career. So, there's this bit of an intersection of the Asian identity plus the mental health identity. So, in thinking about your career as a person of color, what were some of the challenges you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Right. So in choosing predominantly white institution at PWI for my doctorate program, I really didn't think about the implications or how that was going to impact my experience as someone Asian American in that program. So I was the only Asian female from my graduate school cohort, and only a handful of BIPOC folks identified in the program at a time. So there had been a few times where I was tokenized or selectively called out not in such a way like about me per se, but thinking as someone who looks Asian or, identifies as Asian, I was asked by a professor, an older white male in my first year of graduate school for psychotherapy skills class, why would an Asian female patient avert her eye gaze at him? As if I could be someone who could explain or represent all of Asian female patient perspectives. So I was very thrown off by that. I didn't know quite what to say to that. I think I might have, I don't even remember actually if I even answered his question, because I was just, and maybe someone cut in at the time because
I would cut in. I would say, excuse you? Well, can you ask that question again? What do you mean by that?
Because in my like saliency of like my identities was so brought to the forefront like throughout my time and my graduate program, and especially in that moment. But then it wasn't until a classmate after that, exchange, really asked me like, how was that for you? Like, what was that like? Because no one had ever asked me that question before. And also, how did that impact me afterwards? So that was really striking for me. But so it again speaks to though feeling seen and heard and actually followed up on like that by a classmate, really did make a difference for me in that moment. And so when things came to a head with the pandemic, right, and then of course with the anti-Asian hate crimes that were just made more apparent, but then on the rise, of course, too, right, I emailed a call to action to my program director and my faculty members at the time, because this was coming off the heels of the Atlanta spa shootings that had happened, that like really, I think like just struck a chord for me, especially because of who was targeted and sort of the nature of that violent act against them. And in emailing that call to action, I heard back from like one adjunct faculty professor, one professor out of the 14 who I emailed, and then the rest were silent. Like the silence was deafening in that respect to my request to show either support, to call, check in on those who may be getting affected more so by these hate crimes. And then those who did respond, I do appreciate that they did respond, even if privately to me, to show their support of that. But there wasn't actual, follow through, or there wasn't, actionable steps that were taken to show support, during that time. Like there was deferment, if anything, to me by our program director, like, oh, well, what would that look like? Like how, can you tell us how to support you then? Which can be a fair question, I guess, to ask. Really, I did want for there to be more collaboration by those, people who are in, power in our program to actually support those of us who were being impacted at the time.
It must have been very lonely during that time.
Yeah, it really felt that way.
I mean, I remember hearing about the news and was just shocked, like many AAPI folks who heard about the news of the Atlanta spa shooting we're just shocked, and for faculty members or people in position of power, especially when someone is reaching out like yourself saying, hey, can we create a space to address this? You're right. It is a fair question to say, okay, how can we support you? Well, I think that while fair is insufficient,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious what it would have been like if, hey, how can we support you? Let's have a meeting to talk about what we can do.
Yeah.
Like you said, the collaboration piece. Yeah. So having gone through that and just really channeling barriers that you've encountered in terms of your career and also some of the issues that were brought up because of your identity, what does it mean for you to be an Asian American psychologist today?
Yeah. And actually, if I could also follow back to finishing out answering the second part of your question too, of how I overcame those challenges, and it ties into this next question as well, of finding AAPA, was how a big part of how I overcame that sense of loneliness, isolation, disillusionment, even disappointment, because that's where I ultimately found people who not only are in the field of psychology, this profession, who get the very real challenges and barriers, again, that face a lot of folks, but those who hold similar identities as myself and who very much understood the impact of what was going on during that time in the pandemic and with the hate crimes. So, that first started out with me joining mentorship office hours, virtual office hours that were being offered to my organization. And from there, got tapped to become co-editor in chief of our newsletter. And that's really where I got to know so many people in our organization through that. I got to know the names and faces of those who make up our leadership in our organization. And so really from there, I would say combination of that, also doing community spaces such as with the Asian Mental Health Project with their stay and check-in community learning sessions that they were holding at that time. Those two spaces were especially pivotal for me in helping me form not only my sense of identity better as an Asian American psychologist, but ultimately finding my voice too, and how I can be an advocate for not just myself, but for others. So what that means to me to be an Asian American psychologist is navigating, one thing, the line between hypervisibility and invisibility. So hypervisibility as a perpetual foreigner, I have been told I speak English very well, being that tokenized minority, like with that grad school professor comment that was directed at me. And then also invisibility as the model minority too. You're mentioning earlier, Jack, that we can be seen as a monolith. And so where the diversity of our diaspora is not recognized, where the disparities that are present in our community aren't recognized as well. And so for me, I've felt like being seen as, quote, the model, like I don't need help, or like I am doing very well for myself, like I don't need to be checked in on, or even that internalized, sort of view of like that I've had to struggle with myself of, oh, I quote unquote should be able to do these hard things. I should be successful. I should know how to get through my own mental health challenges with grit and willpower. So, in my profession as a psychologist, so that intersection with my career, I try to still navigate and straddle that line too of like when talking with colleagues. And as I've disclosed my bipolar diagnosis with other folks too, like I've also had some reactions from well-meaning colleagues, but them thinking, oh, like they don't say this out loud or explicitly, but their reaction kind of implying, oh, I seem too high functioning to be someone who has bipolar disorder. Like their kind of preconceived notions of whoever has, whether this kind of mood disorder or other mental health conditions, to think that, yeah, like I don't fit that box, right? Or I don't fit that notion of someone who has that kind of experience. And then also navigating like stereotypes and expectations as an Asian American female psychologist has been something I've had to work through as well, like being seen as non-assertive or someone who's supposed to be quiet, demure. I was given feedback in my grad school program that I wasn't as active of a participant, supposedly, compared to my other peers, even though I definitely spoke out more or commented more than some other peers did. So just being seen as someone who, quote unquote, wasn't assertive or active enough, versus another Asian female peer in another cohort of mine has been given feedback that she was too forward or too aggressive when she spoke her mind. So,
Oh gosh. Yeah, it's like if you sit back and observe, and in fact, just sitting back and observing in many ways is creating support and space. It's a very active thing.
yes,
And then, of course, if you speak up, then you're aggressive. And then it's like, darned if you do, darned if you don't.
right, right. So having these expectations or, thinking we should, quote unquote, should be fitting into these boxes or, yeah, notions about us, right? And, or being seen as that we should be, quote unquote, deferential, or like we just keep our head down and we're hardworking, but we're not seen as leaders. We're not thought of to, as, be assuming these positions of leadership. And so that's been very important for me in, taking on, say, the chair position of our Education and Training Council, or helping support our executive committee in AAPA, so that we can be seen as leaders. Like we are doing things that are very much of leadership and advocacy and in serving our community, right? And the final thing that I'll mention as something I try to navigate in my identities is being multi-ethnic. So someone who's Korean and Filipina American. I've had to really wrestle with these feelings of in between, as if I can only occupy one box, one aspect of my identity. I've been asked before in the past by well-meaning, friends or, peers in college, like, oh, which do I identify with more, my Korean side or my Filipina side, as if I had to choose between the two. And then just with these difficulties of feeling lack of belongingness as well, like wrestling with feeling not American enough, or not Asian enough, not Korean enough, not Filipina enough. And something that AAPA has helped me a lot with is to take ownership of all aspects of my identity, to bring forth all the strengths that the diversity of my experiences from my identities can be brought into this work. So I would say that while the hypervisibility, the invisibility, the stereotypes, the expectations, feeling in between dealing with sense of inadequacy and lack of belongingness, I would say those who I've surrounded myself with, the spaces that I've been able to join, community, professional, have all coalesced into me being able to feel like, I can own all these parts of myself, and that I can bring these aspects into my line of work as a psychologist, as a peer advocate, and as a community leader as well.
To integrate all the differential components of who we are, and that's what makes us whole. We are a composite of all our different identities, as opposed to I'm leaning more into this. Well, I'm leaning more into this particular identity at this phase of my life.
Right.
Doesn't mean it won't grow later on. So, and it sounds like with AAPA, that there's really a lot of not just educational resources. You're talking about mentorship. You're talking about professional spaces that actually encourages people to address their ethnic and racial identity. And for me, that is very much unheard of in a way where when I think of professional organizations, I think of it from a very utilitarian, I'm getting something out of this. It's sort of an exchange, as opposed to the humanity side of things, where we're also helping, trying to foster the personal growth piece. And so it's great what AAPA is doing here. Do you have any additional thoughts or any other final thoughts you'd like to share with us about your work as well as the work at AAPA?
Just, yeah, if folks have resonated with my story, with the experiences that I've shared and what it is that I'm about, and love to have additional support around promoting, we are looking for a co-chair and or vice chair of our Education and Training Council in AAPA. We're definitely looking for more members in general for ETC and AAPA as a whole. If you're looking to support those with mood disorders, my advocacy efforts with DBSA could very much use support as well. You're welcome to learn more about them as an organization, about the peer support groups that are held by them. And then finally, just for those who are listening and, want to learn more about mental health support, and if you're even thinking about a career in psychology yourself, and you're someone who identifies as Asian American, or has someone with lived experience of mental health conditions, hopefully my story, my shares today can serve as some inspiration or some hope, even that it can be possible. People can succeed in spite of having mental health challenges, and having these identities of Asian American does not have to mean that we're, boxed into what people think that we could or should be, that we are much more than just a box, or that what people put us in.
Dr. Yang, thank you so much for your time and your commitment to the community.
Thank you so much.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.